Snuggle Stories presents The Adventures of Winston the Pig. Meet Winston. Written by Sarah Ambrosia Mulleneaux and illustrated by Nadia Lobanova. Meet Winston the Pig. He is no ordinary pig. Shortly after being born, he was abandoned on Mr. and Mrs. Goat's porch. Mr. and Mrs. Goat soon found out that Winston loved food, probably more than any other pig they ever met. They would catch him in the cupboards or hiding in a closet eating. He was always getting into trouble. Winston had a hard time making friends. He would get into trouble a lot at school, mainly for eating the other students' lunches. If you ever visited his classroom, you would probably find him sitting in a corner, looking at the wall because he was in time out. On the playground, Winston was often playing alone. He would either get picked last on a team or not at all if it made the teams uneven. All he really wanted was to fit in. Winston pretty much loved any kind of food. It was all his favorite. He never had a problem finishing his dinner. In fact, he was always the first one done. The only things he didn't like were olives and green peppers. Mrs. Goat did not like cleaning Winston's room, especially under his bed. There would be food wrappers, orange peels, banana peels, and so on. On hot days, Winston had to be careful not to stay outside for too long. Unlike other animals, pigs do not sweat. Sweating helps you stay cool. If you ever see a pig in the mud, it is because they are trying to stay cool. Winston did not get invited to very many birthday parties, mainly because the first one he went to, he ate the cake before anyone could sing happy birthday. Mr. and Mrs. Goat were constantly in the principal's office because Winston got into trouble so often. Winston would have to stay after school a lot or go in early for detention. He did not mind so much because at least there he was getting one-on-one attention from the teacher. After school, the other kids were always playing outside in the neighborhood, but not Winston. Nobody ever came knocking on his door. He spent most of his time reading books in his room. Winston was very smart and, believe it or not, top of his class. One day, the neighborhood had a picnic to celebrate the end of the school year. All of the students were off playing games while Winston sat under a tree sulking. As the picnic neared the end, parents were gathering up their kids and getting ready to go home. Mrs. Duck counted all of her ducklings and realized that one was missing. She even counted twice to make sure. Mrs. Duck began to panic. The littlest duckling, Keith, was missing. His brothers and sisters said he had been right behind them when they were called. Everyone began to look around and yell Keith's name to try and find him, but they had no luck. Winston then offered to help look for Keith. At first, nobody wanted his help, but they realized they had no choice but to listen to his plan. Winston asked Mrs. Duck if she had anything with her like clothing or a toy that smelled like Keith. Pigs have a very good sense of smell, even better than dogs. Keith had a stuffed bear he took everywhere with him. Mrs. Duck found it on the picnic table. Winston smelled the teddy bear and then began to go look for Keith, taking the teddy bear with him. He kept sniffing the ground to find Keith's scent. It took him far away from the picnic area. Everyone was getting impatient, thinking that this was just a game for Winston to get attention. The scent took Winston to a nearby lake. All of a sudden, he heard poor little Keith yelling for help. He had fallen into a hole, and because he was the smallest of the ducklings, he could not get out. Winston's nose saved the day. They got Keith out of the hole, and then everyone cheered for Winston. Mrs. Duck was so grateful that she offered Winston an invitation to her house anytime he wanted and all the snacks he could eat. Winston became the neighborhood hero and was known all around town for finding Keith the duck. Things changed at school too. The other students started talking to him and getting to know him. He helped them in class and with their homework. He even promised not to take their lunches anymore. To top everything off, Winston was selected as the student of the month, and he never had to play alone again.
Like this video, give a thumbs up and subscribe.
See you next week!